The first doctors' strike for decades piles the pressure on Jeremy Hunt. Thousands are staging a 24-hour walkout with the threat of further action to come. The Health Secretary is calling for more negotiations.
We want the NHS to offer the safest and best care in the world, and we all have that in common. So the right thing to do is to talk, not do what we're seeing today, which is put patients at risk.
Also tonight, terror in Istanbul. Tourists are killed by a suspected IS suicide bomber.
Did you kill Cyan Blake, Arthur?
Excuse us.
In court in Ghana, the man wanted here for the murder of his partner and their children.
And the final photo and the smile that hid Bowie's cancer secret.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Tens of thousands of junior doctors are nearly halfway through the first doctors' strike for 40 years tonight as the dispute becomes increasingly bitter. The Health Secretary has described the action as completely unnecessary and urged negotiators to get back around the table.
But if anything, the row has deepened today, with some doctors refusing to work after one hospital in the West Midlands claimed it was struggling to cope. Our health editor Rachel Younger reports on the day doctors went on strike.
Save our NHS! Save our NHS!
In every corner of England, from Norwich in the east to Leeds in the north, junior doctors man the picket lines instead of the wards.
You can save us, don't let them break us.
This, the only harmony to be found in a dispute so fierce it brought out doctors who thought they'd never do this, like Amelia in Milton Keynes.
We make difficult decisions every day, but this is the most difficult decision I've ever had to make in my 3 years so far as a doctor.
And here at least it was the doctors, not the government, that even those with the most vulnerable of patients were backing.
They are overworked, and from our experience of being in hospital with him, we've really seen how hard they work, and they deserve a lot of credit and a lot of praise.
Inside, equally sympathetic consultants took over junior doctors' work.
What's things been for you? I had a little bit of trouble in the leg in the night.
And they did so willingly.
I think it's important that we keep patients safe, but it's also important that we keep our staff safe, and it's important that we value our staff and that their morale is high.
We need one to go home now, but
it's not been easy. This was one discharge team battling without their junior doctors to get patients home so more could be admitted. But in Sandwell in the West Midlands, this hospital said its juniors had to come back because they couldn't cope with demand.
Save our NHS!
Its juniors said no because management had breached their agreement.
They sent an email out at 8:15 this morning asking us to come back in, not telephoning us like they said they would. At the moment, the clinical incident is an internal capacity issue because we've got too many patients that we need to discharge.
None of this made for an easy day for the Health Secretary.
That's why we want a safe NHS.
We need a safe NHS, he insisted, before issuing this appeal to striking doctors.
It's not acceptable to have mortality rates at the weekend that are 11 to 15% higher, and we want the NHS to offer the safest and best care in the world. And we all have that in common. So the right thing to do is to talk, not do what we're seeing today, which is put patients at risk.
He argues that to protect patients, doctors need to work more unsocial hours at a plain time rate, with better basic pay on offer to compensate.
But right at the heart of this row is the belief shared by many staff that they're being pushed to the limit in a, quite frankly, cash-strapped NHS because there just isn't the money to pay for a full 7-day service.
The government insists it is affordable, but with 2 more strikes still to come, there is little sign of a speedy recovery from the worst dispute in decades. Rachel Younger, ITV News, Milton Keynes.
Well, today's industrial action forced the cancellation of thousands of operations and routine appointments. There'll be even more disruption if the 48-hour walkout goes ahead in a fortnight's time. Well, Debbie Edward heard from 2 patients affected by today's action with very differing views on who's to blame.
Push yourself up with your good leg, even if you have to rock.
Patricia Thompson was a nurse for over 40 years. She describes working for the NHS as a privilege. It angered her to see a picket line outside Worthing Hospital as she arrived to find out whether her cataracts operation would go ahead.
I don't think it's professional. What's happened to the Hippocratic Oath? Yes, doctors shouldn't be having to work enormously long hours. But to me, this is a political thing. It's not to do with the patient.
While Patricia's anger was directed at the junior doctors taking strike action, others blame the government for letting it get this far.
I just wish I'd have been in hospital at the moment.
31-year-old Michelle Gendrel was due to have a hysterectomy this afternoon. She has suffered severe pain since she was 15. It wasn't an easy decision to go ahead with the operation, but it was her last resort.
The hospital rang me at about 3 minutes to 7, just before I was due to take me preload drink, obviously preparing myself for the operation, and they just rang and told me it was cancelled and it's up to a 3-month wait to get booked back in.
How did you feel at that moment?
Devastated, to be honest. Really, really upset over it.
Michelle, like many others, now faces months of uncertainty, back on a waiting list again. Debbie Edward, ITV News, St Helens.
Right, let's speak to our political editor, Robert Peston, who's at Westminster tonight. Robert, we're always halfway through this strike now, more promised. How do you sense this is playing out for, well, both sides?
Well, with 4,500 procedures, operations cancelled, I think what's going to trouble most people is I don't think we're any nearer a settlement. I've spoken to both the doctors and indeed the government, and both sides are adamant that they're sticking to their position. The doctors saying that the new 7-day working practices would stretch them too thin and put patients at risk. And Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, saying the government made an important manifesto commitment to make sure that weekend services in hospitals are as good as weekday services, and it's absolutely essential that the government achieves that. Now, talking to my government sources, I think the one thing that is worrying them is that we've gone through the strike so far and there haven't been any major incidents, nothing on top of those cancellations of operations to genuinely worry the general public. And worse than that from the government, there is lots of cooperation from consultants, very explicit cooperation, and as far as one can see, some less explicit cooperation, but cooperation nonetheless from the management of hospitals. So in those circumstances, the worry for the ministers would be that this will go on to the next strike, and the political damage for the government in those circumstances could be very significant indeed.
All right, Robert, thank you very much indeed.
10 people, 8 of them German tourists, have been killed by an apparent suicide bomber in the heart of Istanbul's tourist area. The explosion happened in Sultan Ahmet Square, close to the historic Blue Mosque and the Grand Bazaar.
15 people have also been injured. It's not thought any Britons were hurt. Turkey's Prime Minister claims the suspected bomber was a foreign-born member of so-called Islamic State. From the scene, Emma Murphy sent this report.
Canlı bomba, ölüler var şu anda.
In the heart of Istanbul, just yards from one of the country's most treasured mosques, a blast targeting locals and tourists. The streets of this beautiful city left strewn with the dead and injured. Though we can't independently verify this picture, it's believed it captures the moment of the explosion near the Sultan Ahmet Square.
I saw 3 or 4 dead bodies and some wounded woman who screams. I don't know what she said, but she screamed.
In an area normally packed with tourists, people fled in fear of a second incident. The attack happened just after 10 o'clock. Next to the city's Blue Mosque. Most of those killed were German holidaymakers. Those nearby told how the ground shook so hard it felt like an earthquake.
Some people who are working there are just running, and when we asked them, they told that unbelievable bomb. So really we do afraid. Everybody go inside of their shop. I mean, not just us, all of the street, nobody get out.
The Turkish government believed the bomber had recently come from Syria.
This incident shows us once again that we need to stand in solidarity. We need to stand as one nation against terror attacks.
With so many tourists among the dead and wounded, the Turkish Prime Minister offered his condolences to German Chancellor Angela Merkel.
Heute traf es Istanbul.
We must ascertain that today Istanbul was hit, Paris was hit, Tunisia was hit, and Ankara too was already hit. Apart from the grief we obviously feel today, it shows that we need to act decisively against terrorism.
Und neben der Trauer,
even before today's bombing, Turkey was a country on high alert. In October, more than 100 were killed in Ankara after a suicide bombing blamed on the so-called Islamic State.
And Emma, this attack does seem to have been absolutely targeted at tourists.
This is one of those attacks on the tourists that they'd feared would come at some point soon. But let's make no mistake about it, this is also a very significant attack. In recent weeks, the authorities have foiled a number of suspected incidents, not least on New Year's Eve. But they knew that they were being very lucky, and they knew that at some point their luck would run out. It seems to have at this point. Now, what is interesting is that having certain this is absolutely at the heart of the tourism industry. It brings in £20 billion a year to this country. ISIS described Turkey as part of the coalition of crusaders, and it is quite clear they are now bringing the fight straight to this country.
OK, Emma Murphy in Istanbul, thank you. And we do apologise for our sound problems on that line with Emma.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News. The man wanted over the murder of the former EastEnders actress and their children appears in court.
And tribute concerts are planned for David Bowie as the last photograph of the star emerges. Those stories and more after the break. Hello and welcome back. A 4-year-old girl who cannot speak and has damaged kidneys and eyes has had her mystery condition identified thanks to a pioneering British DNA database. Georgia Walburn-Green's disease baffled doctors and was devastating for her parents, but it's now been diagnosed as a genetic condition by the 100,000 Genomes Project. As our science correspondent Alok Jha explains, it's said to help many other families too.
You did it. Show Daddy. Which one's the first?
Georgia's parents didn't know anything was wrong with their little girl until moments after she was born.
We had about 20 minutes worry-free, and then the doctor came and drew the curtains round us on the ward and told us that there might be a problem.
Georgia is now 4 years old and has had problems with her eyes, kidneys and brain. Doctors couldn't pinpoint the cause, so they decided to investigate her DNA.
When we got the call from Great Ormond Street to say they'd found the gene, it was the biggest day of my life. Apart from having Georgia, and it was up there. It feels like we can move forward.
Scientists look for differences between Georgia's DNA and that of her parents. They identified a mutation in just 1/2 of one gene that could be related to Georgia's condition. Her result will now help identify other cases as part of the 100,000 Genomes Project.
For the thousands of children taking part in this project, their genetic codes won't necessarily provide them with treatment straight away, but they'll be the first biological clues as to what's wrong. For parents, that could be incredibly useful closure. And for scientists and doctors, that's critical information for future research.
For patients who can spend years undergoing uncomfortable tests in hospitals, genome sequencing offers a fast-track investigation.
For a whole tranche of people, this is going to be a whole order of magnitude more efficient than the diagnostic journeys that we've been able to offer up until now. It's going to be much more quick and much more straightforward.
Do you put ketchup on your egg? You might do.
Georgia's genetic sequence has helped her parents come to terms with her condition. It also told them that any more children they have are unlikely to share Georgia's fate. Genetic medicine has helped this family. It'll help thousands more in the future. Alok Jha, ITV News.
The man wanted here in the UK over the murder of a former EastEnders actress and their children faced a judge for the first time in Ghana today. Arthur Simpson Kent was arrested on Saturday after the bodies of his partner, Cyan Blake, and their sons were found at their home in Kent. Our correspondent Martin Geisler was at the court in Accra.
Arthur Simpson Kent was brought to court this morning, handcuffed, in the back of an unmarked saloon car.
Did you kill Cyan Blake, Arthur?
Excuse us.
Why did you come to Ghana when your family were missing, Arthur?
He said nothing as he was led through a nondescript doorway and into the crumbling office block where the magistrate sits. In a crowded, stuffy courtroom, the indictment was read out. There were 3 charges: the murders of Cyan Blake and their 2 sons, Zachary, aged 8, and 4-year-old Amon.
Arthur Simpson Kent wasn't asked to plead to the charges, and the hearing was quickly overtaken by legal argument. His lawyers insist there are serious issues with the handling of this case. They say there was no warrant for his arrest here in Ghana on Saturday, and they insist they haven't been given access to any of the case files.
After the hearing, they suggested that should have been enough to set him free.
We believe the procedures that are provided under law in this country, when it comes to matters of arrest for extradition, were not followed, for which reason Arthur must be released.
The judge, though, ordered Arthur Simpson Kent to be taken back into custody. The court will sit again in 2 weeks' time, when formal extradition proceedings could begin in earnest. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Accra, Ghana.
Here, the serial killer Robert Black has died in prison in Northern Ireland, aged 68. Black was serving a multiple life sentence for the murder of 4 schoolgirls in the 1980s. His victims were 11-year-old Susan Maxwell, 5-year-old Caroline Hogg, 10-year-old Sarah Harper and 9-year-old Jennifer Cardy.
The Rochdale MP Simon Danshuk has been interviewed by police in connection with a rape allegation from 2006. Mr Danshuk attended a police station voluntarily and was not arrested. He has always denied the allegations.
The oil giant BP is axing 4,000 jobs, including 600 from its operations in the North Sea. The announcement comes as crude oil prices have dropped to their lowest level for 12 years.
And the National Lottery says a couple from the Scottish Borders has won half of Saturday's £66 million jackpot. The other winning ticket, though, unbelievably, still has not been claimed.
Images from David Bowie's final photo shoot have been released showing him smiling, happy and as stylish as ever. They were taken to promote his last album, launched just 2 days before he died of cancer.
His first wife, Angie, who's currently on Celebrity Big Brother, has spoken about his death for the first time, saying it was the end of an era. Richard Pallow reports.
These are probably the last ever photographs of David Bowie, as irrepressible as ever. Released alongside his new album last week, a smile as wide as that hat, and not a hint of what he would have known was fast approaching.
There's a starman waiting in the sky.
And last night, fans said farewell in some style and number.
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to go in.
The streets of his birthplace, Brixton in South London, the scene of an impromptu celebration. Rachel Pronger, one of so many to turn out.
I burst into tears straight away. It was just a really powerful, sad, but also really wonderful celebration.
And emotional.
Very emotional. The whole day was very, very emotional.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Although details of Bowie's funeral have not been announced, 2 memorials have. A concert in New York in March, while here, next month's Brit Awards will pay tribute. His first wife, Angie, is currently a contestant in the TV programme Celebrity Big Brother. Told off-camera beforehand about his death, she has chosen to stay in the show.
I haven't seen him for so many years. I can't make a big drama out of it. I just feel like an era has ended with his passing. I'm so very sad.
A feeling so many will still share this evening. Richard Pallow, ITV News.
And finally tonight, elderly billionaire to wed famous model. Well, it's the kind of story Rupert Murdoch would expect to see in one of his tabloids.
Except he chose to announce his forthcoming marriage to Jerry Hall in the classified pages of The Times. Martha Fairley reports on Mr Murdoch's happy headline news.
It's been a conventional courtship, made public on a date at the Rugby World Cup and then a night at the movies. Except he's 84-year-old media mogul Rupert Murdoch and she's 59-year-old model and actress Jerry Hall. Their engagement was announced in one of his newspapers, The Times. This will be Jerry Hall's first marriage. Engaged to Roxy Music frontman Brian Ferry, she left him for Mick Jagger. Their unofficial wedding in Bali in 1990 was later declared invalid and they split in 1999. But for Rupert Murdoch, this will be his fourth, marrying Patricia Booker in 1959, then Anna Torv in 1967. 17 days after they divorced, he married Wendy Deng. She famously fended off a custard pie attack on her husband at a Commons Select Committee inquiry.
Mrs. Robinson, you were trying to seduce me.
The next Mrs. Murdoch is just as feisty, about to reprise her role as Mrs. Robinson in The Graduate, but this time her suitor is 25 years her senior.
They've probably met a million times before on the showbiz scene, and I think they're both ready to sort of step out, and obviously there'll be a million eyes on them, but they're used to that in their everyday lifestyles anyway.
Jerry's reported to have said she prefers older men because she looks better next to them. Her fiancé seems more than happy with that. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
I agree with that, actually. Shall it be said? That's all for now. Tom Bradley's here with the news at 10.
But from all of us on the Evening News, have a great evening.